HESI A2 Biology Carbohydrates, Lipids and Proteins. Question 1. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A cell from a compost ecosystem contains an unusually large number of structures specialized for protein modification and sorting. Which activity is this cell most likely performing at a high rate? Option A, protein modification and sorting. Option B, formation of an external mineral shell. Option C, random chromosome loss. Option D, passive storage of hereditary information. The correct answer is option A, protein modification and sorting. Newly made proteins are modified, labeled, and directed toward their destinations. Abundance of a cellular component usually reflects the demand for its specialized activity. The observation therefore links cell structure with the physiological work being emphasized. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 2. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. During a compost ecosystem, damaged organelles accumulate because acidic digestive vesicles cannot break them down. Which immediate cellular consequence is most likely? Option A. The plasma membrane becomes a chromosome. Option B. Worn components and macromolecules build up in the cytoplasm. Option C. DNA replication accelerates in every cell. Option D. Photosynthesis begins in animal cells. The correct answer is option B. Worn components and macromolecules build up in the cytoplasm. Intracellular recycling depends on vesicles containing hydrolytic enzymes. When those enzymes or compartments fail, cellular debris is not efficiently degraded and reused. Accumulation can interfere with normal metabolism and cell survival. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 3. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. During protein synthesis in a compost ecosystem, which molecule carries a specific amino acid and pairs its anticodon with an mRNA codon? Option A, phospholipid. Option B, messenger RNA only. Option C, transfer RNA. Option D, DNA polymerase. The correct answer is option C, transfer RNA. An adapter molecule links the nucleotide code to the amino-acid sequence. One region binds a particular amino acid, while another contains a complementary anticodon. This matching allows the ribosome to add the correct subunit to the growing chain. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Stressed about your HESI A2 exam? We can take HESI A2 exam for you remotely and undetected. We always guarantee a pass and payments only after results. To send us an email, scan the code or tap the link in the description and let's get it done. Question 4. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. During a compost ecosystem, an enzyme reacts with one substrate but not with another molecule of similar size. Which feature most directly explains this specificity? Option A. Every enzyme binds all molecules equally. Option B. The enzyme contains the organism's full genome. Option C. The active site has a complementary shape and chemical environment. Option D. Substrates must be larger than the enzyme. The correct answer is option C. The active site has a complementary shape and chemical environment. Binding depends on three-dimensional fit and compatible chemical interactions between a catalyst and its substrate. A similar -sized molecule may still fail to align correctly or form the required bonds. Specificity allows cells to regulate many reactions independently. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 5. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. Cells in a compost ecosystem carry out aerobic cellular respiration. Which overall change best describes the process? Option A. ATP is converted entirely into DNA. Option B. Energy in glucose is transferred to ATP while oxygen is reduced and carbon dioxide is released. Option C. Oxygen is produced from glucose without electron transfer. Option D. Light energy is used to build glucose from carbon dioxide. The correct answer is option B. Energy in glucose is transferred to ATP while oxygen is reduced and carbon dioxide is released. A series of oxidation-reduction reactions removes high-energy electrons from organic fuel. Electron transport ultimately transfers them to oxygen, while released energy supports ADP formation. Carbon atoms from the fuel leave mainly as carbon dioxide. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 6. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. Ribosomes in a compost ecosystem read a messenger RNA sequence in groups of 3 nucleotides. What does each group usually specify? Option A. A complete chromosome. Option B. An amino acid or a start or stop signal. Option C. A phospholipid bilayer. Option D, a new nucleus. The correct answer is option B, an amino acid or a start or stop signal. The genetic code is organized into 3- base units. Transfer RNAs match these units and deliver the corresponding amino acids during polypeptide assembly. Certain units instead signal initiation or termination of translation. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 7. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. During a compost ecosystem, population growth slows when available nesting sites become scarce. How should this factor be classified? Option A, a genetic code. Option B, a trophic pyramid. Option C, a taxonomic domain. Option D, a limiting factor. The correct answer is option D, a limiting factor. A required resource can restrict survival, reproduction, or population growth when its supply is insufficient. The strongest restriction may change as environmental conditions change. Both density-dependent and density-independent influences can limit populations. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 8. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A trait in a compost ecosystem shows codominance. Which observation best demonstrates this inheritance pattern? Option A. The trait is determined entirely by temperature. Option B. A heterozygote always resembles only the recessive homozygote. Option C. A heterozygote displays both allele products distinctly. Option D. The alleles blend into an intermediate product. The correct answer is option C. A heterozygote displays both allele products distinctly. In codominant inheritance, both alleles are expressed rather than one masking the other. The phenotype contains recognizable contributions from each allele. An intermediate blended appearance instead describes incomplete dominance. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Are you looking for HESI A2 exam actual questions? Visit our website pokerexams.com to access HESI A2 exam study guide with actual questions and answers. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description to get HESI A2 exam answer key today. Question 9. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. Two cube-shaped cells in a compost ecosystem have side lengths of 1 units and 3 units. Which cell has the greater surface area to volume ratio and can exchange material more efficiently per unit volume? Option A, the larger cell. Option B, both have the same ratio. Option C, the smaller cell. Option D, the ratio depends only on chromosome number. The correct answer is option C, the smaller cell. Surface area increases with the square of linear size, whereas volume increases with the cube. As a cell becomes larger, volume grows faster than exchange surface. Smaller cells therefore have more membrane area available relative to the amount of cytoplasm they must support. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 10. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. In a BB times BB cross performed during a compost ecosystem, which genotype ratio is expected? Option A, all BB. Option B, 1 BB, 2 BB, 1 BB. Option C, 3 BB, 1 BB. Option D, 1 BB, 1 BB. The correct answer is option B, 1 BB, 2 BB, 1 BB. Each parent produces 2 types of gametes in equal proportions. The 4 equally likely combinations include 1 homozygous dominant, 2 heterozygous, and 1 homozygous recessive. Genotype ratios count allele combinations rather than visible traits. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 11. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. In a plant population from a compost ecosystem, red and white alleles show incomplete dominance, and heterozygotes are pink. Which cross produces red, pink, and white offspring in a 1:2:1 ratio? Option A, pink times pink. Option B, red times white only. Option C, white times white. Option D, red times red. The correct answer is option A, pink times pink. Each intermediate colored parent carries 1 red allele and 1 white allele. Their gametes produce the 2 homozygous forms and the heterozygous form in a 1- to -2- to -1 pattern. Because neither allele fully masks the other, the genotype ratio is also the phenotype ratio. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 12. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. During a compost ecosystem, a researcher records that the leaves are dark green and waxy. How should this observation be classified? Option A, quantitative data. Option B, a controlled variable. Option C, qualitative data. Option D, a mathematical constant. The correct answer is option C, qualitative data. Descriptive observations record qualities such as color, texture, shape, or behavior without assigning a numerical measurement. They can be systematic and useful even though they are not numbers. Measurements such as mass or length are quantitative. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 13. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A cell in a compost ecosystem loses internal protein fibers that maintain shape and move vesicles. Which cellular system has been disrupted? Option A, cell wall. Option B, cytoskeleton. Option C, chromatin. Option D, nucleolus. The correct answer is option B, cytoskeleton. Networks of protein filaments support cell shape, position organelles, and provide tracks for intracellular transport. They also participate in cell movement and division. A rigid extracellular wall cannot substitute for these dynamic internal functions. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 14. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. One nucleotide is inserted near the beginning of a coding sequence in a compost ecosystem. Why can this mutation have a large effect on the protein? Option A. It always changes DNA into lipid. Option B. It shifts the reading frame for many downstream codons. Option C. It affects only the inserted nucleotide and no others. Option D. It prevents DNA from containing bases. The correct answer is option B. It shifts the reading frame for many downstream codons. Translation reads nucleotides in consecutive groups of 3. Adding a base changes how the downstream sequence is divided into codons unless the insertion is a multiple of 3. Many amino acids and possibly the stop position can therefore change. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 15. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. Which process removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and incorporates its carbon into organic matter in a compost ecosystem? Option A, combustion. Option B, cellular respiration. Option C, decomposition only. Option D, photosynthesis. The correct answer is option D, photosynthesis. Autotrophs use carbon dioxide as a carbon source for building sugars and other organic molecules. Respiration, decomposition, and burning commonly return carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. The carbon cycle links these opposing transfers among organisms, air, water, and soil. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 16. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. In a compost ecosystem, a researcher selects only the healthiest organisms for the treatment group but selects organisms randomly for the control group. Which problem is introduced? Option A, taxonomic uncertainty. Option B, osmotic pressure. Option C, independent assortment. Option D, selection bias. The correct answer is option D, selection bias. The groups differ before the treatment begins, so health status could influence the measured outcome. Random assignment or matched selection helps make groups comparable. A biased starting sample weakens the ability to attribute differences to the treatment. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 17. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. For a heterozygous monohybrid cross in a compost ecosystem with complete dominance, which phenotype ratio is expected? Option A, all recessive. Option B, 1 dominant, 3 recessive. Option C, 3 dominant, 1 recessive. Option D, 1 dominant, 1 recessive. The correct answer is option C, 3 dominant, 1 recessive. 3 of the 4 genotype combinations contain at least 1 dominant allele. Those 3 express the dominant phenotype, while the homozygous recessive combination produces the alternate trait. Phenotype grouping therefore differs from the 1- to -2- to -1 genotype ratio. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 18. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A mature forest in a compost ecosystem is removed by fire, but soil and seeds remain. Which recovery pattern is expected? Option A, primary succession beginning without soil. Option B, immediate restoration of the original mature community. Option C, no succession because fire prevents future life. Option D, secondary succession beginning with organisms that colonize the existing soil. The correct answer is option D, secondary succession beginning with organisms that colonize the existing soil. When a disturbance leaves soil in place, recovery can begin from surviving seeds, roots, microorganisms, and nearby colonists. Grasses and fast-growing plants often establish before shrubs and later trees. Primary succession instead starts where soil has not yet formed. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Stressed about your HESI A2 exam? We can take HESI A2 exam for you remotely and undetected. We always guarantee a pass and payments only after results. To send us an email, scan the code or tap the link in the description and let's get it done. Question 19. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A single nucleotide is replaced in a gene from a compost ecosystem, but the encoded amino acid remains unchanged. Which feature of the genetic code explains this result? Option A, proteins are copied directly from DNA without RNA. Option B, codons are made of amino acids. Option C, every mutation removes a chromosome. Option D, more than one codon can specify the same amino acid. The correct answer is option D, more than one codon can specify the same amino acid. The code is redundant, meaning several triplets can correspond to the same amino acid. A base substitution may therefore change a codon without changing the polypeptide sequence. Such a change can be silent even though the DNA sequence has been altered. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 20. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. Which sequence correctly traces information flow during protein production in cells from a compost ecosystem? Option A, mRNA is replicated into a chromosome without enzymes. Option B, ATP is translated directly into RNA. Option C, DNA is transcribed into mRNA, and mRNA is translated into a polypeptide. Option D, protein is transcribed into DNA, and DNA becomes lipid. The correct answer is option C, DNA is transcribed into mRNA, and mRNA is translated into a polypeptide. A gene first serves as a template for an RNA transcript. Ribosomes then interpret the transcript and join amino acids in the encoded order. The pathway transfers sequence information without converting protein back into genetic material. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 21. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A highly active cell in a compost ecosystem has many folds in its plasma membrane. Which advantage is most directly produced by these folds? Option A, more surface area for transport proteins and exchange. Option B, elimination of concentration gradients. Option C, a permanent decrease in membrane fluidity. Option D, less contact with the surrounding environment. The correct answer is option A, more surface area for transport proteins and exchange. Membrane folding increases available boundary area without requiring an equivalent increase in cell volume. Additional area permits more channels, carriers, receptors, and enzymes to be embedded. This structural adaptation supports faster exchange and specialized processing. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 22. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. Plants in a compost ecosystem cannot use atmospheric nitrogen gas directly. Which biological activity commonly converts nitrogen into forms that enter food webs? Option A, nitrogen fixation by certain microorganisms. Option B, diffusion of proteins into the atmosphere. Option C, photosynthesis by all animals. Option D, mitosis in plant roots. The correct answer is option A, nitrogen fixation by certain microorganisms. Specialized prokaryotes convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia or related compounds. Other microbes and plant processes transform these compounds into forms used to build amino acids and nucleotides. Consumers obtain nitrogen by eating organisms or organic matter. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 23. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A cell in a compost ecosystem uses energy to move ions against a concentration gradient. Which molecule most directly provides readily usable energy for the membrane pump? Option A, DNA. Option B, carbon dioxide. Option C, cellulose. Option D, ADP. The correct answer is option D, ADP. Hydrolysis of a terminal phosphate bond can release energy and transfer a phosphate group to a protein. This coupling changes the shape or activity of transport machinery. Genetic information and structural polysaccharides do not serve as the cell's immediate energy currency. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 24. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. Oxygen becomes unavailable to cells in a compost ecosystem, but glycolysis continues for a limited time. Why can fermentation help maintain ADP production? Option A. It regenerates NAD plus so glycolysis can continue. Option B. It creates a new nucleus for each cell. Option C. It replaces glucose with DNA. Option D. It produces oxygen from carbon dioxide. The correct answer is option A. It regenerates NAD plus so glycolysis can continue. Glycolysis requires an oxidized electron carrier to accept electrons. When the electron transport chain cannot operate normally, fermentation transfers electrons to an organic molecule and restores the carrier. The pathway yields far less ADP than aerobic respiration but supports short-term glycolytic activity. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting. Question 25. Temperature, moisture, and organism activity are recorded throughout decomposition. A population survey in a compost ecosystem uses only 2 organisms, while a second survey uses 50 randomly selected organisms. Why is the larger sample generally preferable? Option A. It is more likely to represent population variation and is less affected by one unusual individual. Option B. It proves causation without an experiment. Option C. It removes all need for random selection. Option D. It guarantees that every measurement is identical. The correct answer is option A. It is more likely to represent population variation and is less affected by one unusual individual. Larger samples usually capture a broader range of natural variation. Individual outliers have less influence on the overall estimate when more observations are included. Sampling method still matters because a large biased sample can remain unrepresentative. The evidence from a compost ecosystem applies this principle in a concrete biological setting.